Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Legal Tech Hub Product Briefing. I am Stephanie Wilkins, the Director of Content here at Legal Tech Hub, and today I'm joined by Min-Kyu Jung, the co-founder and CEO of Ivo. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Stephanie.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see the demo we're going to do today, but before we jump in, I was hoping you could tell our audience a little bit about yourself and how you came to found Ivo.
Yeah. Oh, nice to meet everyone. My name is Min-Kyu. I'm the co-founder here at Ivo. I used to be a corporate lawyer in a previous life. I spent a lot of time reviewing and negotiating contracts. And I think repeatedly the thought I'd have in my head over and over again was, oh boy, I wish a robot could help me with this task or do this particular part of my job for me. And so I left my career. I taught myself how to code. I spent a few months talking to every lawyer who would agree to sit down and have a coffee with me to talk about their problems. And now that led to Ivo as we know it today. And really, we have two main products that I'm excited to demonstrate. The first one is a pre-signature contract review solution. It's a Microsoft Word plugin that helps users review and negotiate agreements more efficiently. And then the second product, which I might start with, is a contract intelligence tool.
Great. And I'm sure there is a lot you could show us, but I'm glad that you're going to show us both aspects of that going forward. And so without further ado, maybe we should just share your screen and we should jump into the demo and go from there.
Yeah, let's do it. So I'm going to start with the contract intelligence tool. We call it repository, but really we're agnostic as to wherever you store your documents. So we can store your contracts in Ivo, or we can plug into a variety of data sources such as CLMs or cloud storage solutions like SharePoint or Dropbox or Box or Google Drive, or a CRM like Salesforce as well. And the main point of this product is that we can extract whatever arbitrary piece of information you want across all of your agreements, up to 1 million agreements at a time. And we do this incredibly accurately. I'm going to go through a demo where I show you how this works and go through a scenario together. But just before we do that, there are a couple of other things we've done that I think are particularly interesting. So one example of this is we figured out how to associate related agreements together automatically. So to give you an example of this, if I click on this agreement and I click relationships, you can see that we visualize that here we have a vendor services agreement, and this has been amended on 2 different occasions. And the important thing to note here is I didn't have to do any setup. All I did was upload these documents and Ivo automatically created this relationship visualization for me. And I'll give you, that was a pretty simple example. I'll give you a slightly more complicated one.
Okay.
Where in this case, we have a much more sophisticated agreement. I'm going to turn off the composite view here as well and go to the main agreement. If I go to relationships, you can see here we have a much more complicated agreement with the main agreement here. We see it's been amended on a number of occasions. You see the SOWs that are associated with that agreement, and also the amendments to those SOWs. We actually have about a dozen different relationship types. So it's not like we only understand parent-child hierarchies. We automatically associate agreements by the kind of relationship. Why is this important? Well, you can imagine that when you're trying to extract intelligence from your agreements, it's really important that the tool understands these relationships, right? If you're asking for all agreements where you agree to a termination for convenience, well, it's actually important that we don't just look at the main agreement and each amendment in isolation. We should combine the amendment and the main agreement together to give you a holistic view of what you're looking at. And actually, that's exactly what we do here on the composite document feature, where we create a synthetic document that shows you this is what the agreement looked like across various different points in time. So in January 2025, you can see that we added this, or we changed this royalty provision from 1.5 to 1.75%. You can see we added this termination for convenience provision, but I can keep stepping through each of these different points in the timeline to see how the agreement has evolved. And this is the final version of that agreement.
I really like the visual aspect of it, both that timeline bar and the first screen you showed. That's really interesting.
Yeah. And the other cool thing, by the way, as well, is if I click the composite view toggle here, we will automatically only show you the agreement that's the composite version, like the synthetic version of the document that reflects your current live obligations. And if I click this toggle, I can see the original document and all of the amendments that comprise the final sort of agreement as well. Now, I want to go through just quickly an example of how we can create a new view. So I will create a view for SaaS agreements. I'll click save. And the way I can create a view for SaaS agreements is very straightforward. I can go here to the AI fields. I actually already have a field for whether this is a SaaS agreement. So I'm going to go to the filter and filter down to SaaS agreements. If you've used any sort of contract management tool, this is a pretty familiar process. But where it gets really interesting is I can ask whatever arbitrary question I want. We had an example of a Fortune 500 client recently where they said they wanted to understand all agreements where they could pass on the cost of tariffs to their customer. And we were able to extract that information. We can also, just to give you a very simple example, I could say something like, is there a termination for convenience, which is the example I gave earlier, and we can run through all of your agreements to extract that information. And in this case, I chose a data type of yes, no, but there are other data types we could select from as well. One of the things I'm really proud of is our accuracy. We've taken a unique approach here where it'll take longer to read all of your agreements, but we really do read every single word in all of your agreements. And because we do that, we can get you very accurate results. We tested IVO against the Quad data set. That's the contract understanding etiquette data set, which is the state-of-the-art data set. It's about 500 contracts with 11,000 human lawyer labels across those documents. We score 97% against that data set. But even more notably, in the 3% of cases where we had an inconsistent result with the human data set, we actually found a lot of the time the inconsistency was actually due to an error in the data set itself. So it actually seems that IVO is capable of extracting information more accurately than the average human lawyer. But in this case, you see that we've extracted this information. We can see if the agreement has a termination for convenience. If I click into any one of these agreements, I can go to the termination for convenience section and I can navigate to the relevant source just like this. Fantastic. I know that we're moving quickly, so I'm going to show you a couple of things before we move on to the next product. But any questions from you before I do that?
No, that looks good. I appreciate the quick overview of this, and we'll be putting in a URL at the bottom of the screen at the end of the video if people do want to reach out for more information.
Fantastic. Okay, so the other thing we can do is we have the assistant tool here as well. Now, the assistant tool is the agent that can go away and answer whatever question that you have about your agreements. And it'll use the same features that I showed you earlier in the repository feature. So I could ask a question like, I could use the same example before with the termination of convenience, or use the tariff example. I can say, give me a list of all agreements where a party can pass on cost of tariffs to the counterparty. By the way, one of the things that we do as part of the onboarding process is we'll set up a custom company profile for you. And of course, you could have many company profiles attached to your company. And the company profile will have information about, this is your trading name or DBA. These are the legal entities that are associated with the company. This is our style guide. This is how we like to negotiate contracts. Here's some other relevant information about the company, the industry that we're in, the kind of a risk profile that we have. And all of that information is taken into consideration when we run these queries. So if I were to formulate this question differently and just say, give me a list of all agreements where we can pass on the cost of tariffs to the customer or vice versa, we would understand who you are or who the customer is as part of that query as well. Great. So you can see that the agent has gone through, has tried to figure out the best way to answer your question. It's found 173 agreements that meet our requirements. And you can see the explanation here. It's also going to create this sort of kind of like an artifact that you can open as well. So if I click on this button over here, you can see it generating a report for us. You can see it said, I found 173 agreements that contain provisions allowing a party to pass tariff costs to the counterparty. You can see the analysis of the results, and you can also see how it's decided to apply the filters. And if I go to the table view, you can see here that it's created a table for us of all agreements that meet that requirement. You can see the filter is created. You can see the kind of fields that I might have added here as well. If I like this, I can export this to a spreadsheet, and I can also save this view to my repository so I can access it later as well. That is the agent. And just one last thing before we move on is we also have this feature where we cluster agreements together by the underlying template they were derived from. We can actually visualize this for you like this as well. And part of the reason why you might be interested in this is we can also show you a distribution of all of the agreements you've agreed to derived from that template based on how favorable or unfavorable we think it is. And the way we do this is we generate what we call a synthetic playbook derived from that template agreement. And we'll tell you, so this particular provision, confidential information and data protection, you can see that we've agreed, no counterparty has ever disagreed with our standard position there. But this other provision, supply security obligations and notification of security events, you can see quite a lot of the time, actually the counterparties manage to extract a concession from us. And then if I were to click into any one of these agreements, I can see the specific agreement in question and why we consider that to be high or low risk. In this case, the main issue is the cap on liability is 2x the amount paid in the prior 12 months rather than 1x, which is our standard. Fantastic. I know I've gone through a lot. There's still a lot I would, in an ideal world, I could show you, but I
Of
am going
course.
to stop there before I go to the review solution. Okay, so the product that I showed you earlier was a post-signature tool. This one is pre-signature, which means that we haven't negotiated the contract yet. In this particular case, we've received a SaaS vendor agreement from a counterparty, and it's time to review the contract. There's a number of features here. I won't go through all of them. Just the first one, so you're aware, this assistant tool is the same as the assistant tool that I showed you earlier in the web, which means we can access and we have knowledge of your historical contracts as we're reviewing the agreement as well. But the main feature here is the review feature. And what I'll do is I'll select the playbook. The playbook reflects my preferred negotiating positions. We have a legal engineering team that will help you create these playbooks from scratch if you don't have them at all. Or if you do have playbooks, we'll help you turn them into playbooks that can be used with our AI solution. I can upload additional documents for context here as well, particularly relevant if, for example, you're reviewing an amendment and you need to have knowledge of the original agreement. I can add any context about the seal. I can say counterparty is an AI vendor, so we are particularly sensitive to IP considerations. And I can also make sure that we're comparing the document against certain market standards. This agreement is a California jurisdiction agreement, it's a SaaS services agreement in the technology industry. So we'll keep that into consideration as we make our recommendations. But as we run the review, we're really doing two reviews in parallel. The first review is a review against our playbook. That's the checklist item review. And the second review we do is the IVO flags review, which is more of a benchmark review where we're reviewing the agreement for consistency or just generic issues and risks, keeping in mind what is considered market across these inputs. So I'll start with the playbook. With the playbook review, we're just going to go through each one of these issues one by one. One of the issues that we have as a company is that the limitation of liability must be mutual and no more than the annual contract value. So in this case, you can see that IVO will say that the requirement has failed. It'll give us an explanation for why the requirement has failed. Let me just remove these comments that I added earlier. And then we will generate a redline recommendation. In addition to generating the redline recommendation, we will also present a number of options to you. So you have your standard option and you have your fallback options as well. These are options that are derived from your playbook. So of course, depending on your playbook, you might have different scenarios you want to account for. And we can also set up approval escalation. So if you want a guardrail or a certain fallback position behind the approval of somebody else in your team. But then you see that IVO will go ahead and generate the redline recommendation. One of the things that we do really well is we generate surgical redlines that are as precise as possible. And we also generate a comment recommendation as well. This can be preloaded through your playbook. All of this is editable. So I can come in here and make whatever changes I want. I can change the comment. I can even make an instruction. So I can say, counterparty is being very unreasonable. Please make this comment more aggressive. Something like this. I can click retry and we'll update the comment based on that instruction here as well. This is an unacceptable imbalance that we must correct. And then I can click apply. We'll add the changes and track changes into the Microsoft Word document. And then we add the redline recommendation as well. And to give you one more example of this very briefly, the other thing we can do is we have knowledge of your clause library. We have knowledge of your precedents. We have knowledge of how you negotiated contracts in the past. So in this case, the counterparty doesn't have a force majeure provision. And one of our requirements is we do have a termination right for force majeure events. So you can see that we've added this provision, but rather than having the AI invent a new force majeure clause, you can see we've taken the language from your clause library. And one thing you'll notice here is it says inspired by a clause library. So you'll note here that the word here is agreement. If I go to my actual clause library and I open the force majeure provision, you'll see that we use the word contract rather than agreement. So what we've done is IVO has looked at the underlying document, has looked at the definition that we use at the start of the agreement, which is agreement. So we've conformed your provision to suit the counterparty's nomenclature, suit the counterparty's formatting and all the rest of it before we make the recommendations. And once we're done, we can click the apply all button if we want to, and we'll apply all of the recommendations into the agreement the way I'm showing you now. The other thing I wanted to flag just very briefly before we finish, let me actually just share my entire screen for this one because we are on Teams and the Teams behaves a little bit differently on this point. And by the way, you can see here that IVO is also inserting the formatting correctly. Little details like this, we've just spent a lot of engineering effort doing that often doesn't come across in the demo, but is a difference between a product that works well in practice. But just a couple of things really, really briefly. So we have the ability to generate reports about your agreement. So we can create issues lists like this automatically. We also have the ability to generate a deal memo covering the key issues in your agreement, a summary of the deal, top risks and other risks of note as well. We also have the ability to review the agreement for consistent use of definitions and clause references as well. So for example, there's a reference to a provision that is misplaced, or if there's a reference to a definition like the effective date that isn't being used in the agreement, we can go in here and we can make that change. But very quickly, the last feature here is the assistant tool, which is as flexible as you want it to be. So I could ask a very open-ended question like, create a table for me summarizing the key risks in this agreement. Whoops, excuse the typo. Include a column with your recommended response. Ivo will go away and create a table for me, and I can download the table as a Microsoft Word document the same way we could do that through the feature that I showed you earlier. We have access to your playbooks, so we have knowledge of your preferred positions. We have knowledge of your historical contracts in your repository as well. So we take that into consideration. And we can also redline the agreement. We can also perform research tasks. We built our own custom web crawler where we prioritize high quality primary legal sources when we make our analysis. But that also allows us to do things like if there's a hyperlink in the agreement that points to a privacy policy or some online terms and conditions, we can take that into consideration as well. But you can see here, we can generate this key risk summary. Then I can say something like, that looks great. Please redline the agreement to be applying your recommendations, something like this. And the agent will go away and apply the red lines for us as well. If you've ever used like a vibe coding solution like Cursor, or if you're familiar with that entire industry of products, this is broadly analogous to that as well.
Well, that was great. Thank you for showing us all of that. We will be putting a URL at the bottom of the screen so you can find out more about Ivo or reach out to Min-Kyu and his team and ask some questions, because I'm sure there's more that you could have shown us than we had time for. But thank you everyone for watching. And thank you again, Min-Kyu, for joining us today. And I hope everyone has a great day.